Hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast number 283. My name is John, and joining me again for the first time in a few weeks is Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Not much. I'm glad we have fully recovered from the Andor finale and we can finally record a podcast about this. We actually died following the final episode. We were legally dead because it was so good, and we've just come back to life and are ready to talk about it.
That's all right. Yeah. So we're going to sidestep the actual reason that we broke our streak, because we had a good, we're talking 3 episodes in a row, Ryan, that we released on a weekly. Yeah, that's quite a streak for us. Yeah. Yeah, we had to take a little break, I guess, because we died after watching Andor, and so now we're back, very tardy, but we're back to discuss the final 3 episodes of the incredible show called Andor. So that's what we're gonna do. Yeah, it ended almost a month ago now, because today is Tuesday, June 3rd. I think it ended on, I want to say it was May 13th, maybe. My birthday was the 12th, I think was a Monday, and I believe the final episodes were the next day. So, it's been a good couple weeks, but that means everybody's been able to listen to all the better podcasts covering these last few episodes, and then we can bring our own perspective to these episodes. And I got to tell you, Ryan, my backlog of podcasts is in the Star Wars category is really backing up, because I'm not listening to the Andor episodes because I don't want to know what everybody else said about it before we do ours. So this is going to feel good just to be able to start to work through the backlog of other podcasts. But let's just go ahead and dig in. We're 3 weeks late. We might as well just get into it, I suppose. And I think this time around we better go episode by episode rather than trying to go arc by arc, because they're pretty distinct kind of stories, I would say. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, the first episode of this last arc, episode 10, is called Make It Stop. And this is a really compelling and very interesting episode, and was pretty surprising to me, because a good deal of it is centered around a flashback. But, we'll kind of get into that in a minute. But I think I know the answer to this question, Ryan, but how did you like this episode, number 10, Make It Stop? Were you impressed? Did you have issues? Before we kind of dig into the specifics.
Yeah, I think it's a very good episode, as every episode of Andor is. I think there's some amazing stuff in this episode. I wasn't super hot on the flashback, as I'm generally not a big flashback guy, especially in Star Wars. But the good stuff in this episode is ridiculously good.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, I agree. That the good stuff is ridiculously good. I didn't mind the flashback too much either, but I live in a household with a person who really hates flashback episodes, so that was a little bit of a hurdle for us to get over. But let's get into it. So it's tense right off the bat. It opens up this episode with Lani sort of ringing the bell, right? So the episode opens with this bell or this chime kind of ringing, and Clea's freaking out about it, and it seems very, sort of dramatic or sort of, I don't know. It seems like a sign of something bad on the horizon, and it turns out it's Lani ringing the bell to notify Luthen and Dedra, or notify Luthen that Dedra is coming for him. So they have this little meeting in the park, and Lani's basically like, I have the biggest news ever for you, but I need some assurances, right? Which was probably a good thought on his part. But he did not stick the landing, because he didn't maintain his his hard bargaining position, I guess you'd say, with Luthen. But he's there to tell Luthen about the Death Star. He's there to tell him that the Emperor's energy program is a lie, that Orson Krennic's been building a secret weapon for over a decade, and he wants to know, like, where will you take us? Like, my wife and my kid are already off planet, but, like, I need to know that we'll be taken somewhere safe. And I just found this conversation, like, so tense because we know Luthen, and I think we knew probably what Luthen was going to do. But he even does tell Lonnie, Yavin, we'll be safe there. We'll go to Yavin, you know. Mm-hmm. But after giving him that little breadcrumb, he's like, so spill your guts and tell me all the news, you know. Tell me about the weapon. So, yeah. Did you have any other thoughts on that conversation between Luthen and Lonnie before we talk about the outcome of this scenario?
No, it's pretty tense, and you kind of don't know which way things are going to go. I think you have a relative idea, but then, like, there was a kind of a point here where I was like, is Luthen going a little soft here? And because it seemed like he was, you know, ready to kind of protect Lonnie, protect his family. You know, he was not withholding information. And, yeah, but that was a bit of a ruse.
Yeah, and I mean, the wild thing is, like, it seems like Luthen should have been like, all right, Lonnie, let's go, grab your stuff, we're out of here. He actually should have taken off with Lonnie, and they might have both been better off. But I guess you don't know what you don't know. And Luthen, you know, I think, you know, the sort of like really harsh reality here is that I think Luthen realized at this point Lonnie has no value to me anymore. He can no longer work in the Empire. He can't go back there. He can't be undercover anymore. Like, there's no returning from this, right? And so he has given me this extremely valuable piece of information, but he knows about me. He knows enough about me that makes him dangerous. So it's like he has no value anymore, but there's a lot of danger in keeping him alive. So, you know, we as an audience are thinking, hey, this guy, you know, sacrificed so much over so many years, and obviously now, and this is one of the great sort of motifs or ideas running through the final episodes of the show, these individuals you never knew of or thought about who contributed so much to the rebellion and made it possible for the rebellion to win, you know, like thinking back to the hotel clerk on Gorman, for instance. But anyway, Lonnie contributed so much, but he's just doesn't have any value anymore. So we want his sacrifice to be recognized and honored, and we want him to get what he deserves, which is not to be shot on a park bench by Luthen, but to, you know, join the rebellion. I'm sure he could have been like one of the guys like, what do you call it when you send it, like you have the machinery, the tools, and there's sparks flying everywhere on Yavin. They seem to have like a whole crew of people that just make sparks like fly, like welding. Was he welding? You know, he could have done some welding probably, you know. Mm-hmm. Not to suggest that's an easy job, but I'm sure Lonnie could have done it. But yeah, that's where my mind is. I just feel like Luthen realized that I've gotten everything from Lonnie I can, and the only way this is going to go is I'm either going to get really lucky, or keeping him alive will end up coming back to haunt us. So he kills him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And before we see the shot of Lonnie's dead body, it cuts to a shot of Luthen walking down the stairs in Coruscant, you know, outside in Coruscant. And it is, I put in my notes, an extremely Dutch angle. It is, you know, completely sideways almost, the camera, the perspective there. So that was, I thought, a nice touch, a good piece of cinematography there to tell us that something was off. And the next thing we see is a Lothcat. I think it's a Lothcat sniffing Lonnie's dead body. So that's is pretty intense opening to the scene, or to the episode, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Luthen has this information now. He brings it back to Clea. They talk about Galen Urso, and they have a whole conversation about the fact that it's time to go. Clea wants to stay back and burn the comms and sort of like hide the information, burn down their office or whatever you want to call it. And Luthen is like, no, you're going. I'll stay back and do that. And when he does choose to stay back and do that, the doorbell rings and Dedra is there. And it's such a great example of how the show can be so dramatic and be so exciting with very little happening, in terms of action or whatever. It was just like such a hype moment to see her standing at the door, like after all this time, all these episodes, these years of Luthen sneaking around and helping to organize the rebellion. The wolf is at the door, the Empire shows up and they've actually caught him. And it was just such a wild revelation, I felt like.
Mm-hmm. I love that Star Wars kind of does these sorts of scenes now. It feels like a very, Disney era Star Wars thing, because I would say it like kind of started with Krennic confronting Galen Erso at his home, at the beginning of Rogue One, and it had that kind of like, that sort of tension that you find in spy thrillers and like war films and whatever else, and then we kind of got it a little bit in Mandalorian with the client and Mando, that first scene we saw at Celebration of Mando season 1, and and then we kind of get like another one of those like and I think there's other examples too, but like these just sort of like tense scenes where that the villain knows everything, and it's like how can the other character like get out of this. Yeah, and then the dance that they do between the two of them in terms of their dialogue and their conversation back and forth is just so well acted and so well written and so well, kind of pulled off. Dedra says to Luthen, "Is everything real?" And he says, what a wise question. And then he responds, "Right now there are only 2 questionable pieces in the gallery. Any guesses?" And it's unbelievable because, they're both standing there sort of like playing their roles and, each lying to the other about, something. Obviously Luthen's entire, persona and everything about him is a ruse, or at least he thinks it is. He hopes it is. She knows that. He knows that. He doesn't know that she knows that, but he thinks she knows that. He's pretty sure she knows that, but also she's playing a role too, right? She's there to purchase or inquire about some, rare items that maybe she could sell on consignment through his shop or whatever the sort of thin excuse was to be there at his door. But yeah, I thought that line was unbelievable. There's only 2 questionable pieces in the gallery right now. So, and then she pulls out the Starpath unit from season 1 and like not slams it, but like thunks it down on the table in front of him. And I love that too, because they both drop their masks at that point. He doesn't come right out and say it like immediately, but basically the mask drops and he's, he understands what's happening and is responding much less in the elegant and, salesman type persona that he usually uses when he's in that storeroom or whatever you call the gallery. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love it. And obviously from there, she realizes that he's melting stuff in the back of the room, and she's like running back there to
to, to try to slow down the damage or whatever it may be. And when she comes back, he has stabbed himself with that dagger, and falls to the ground, sort of dying there. At what point, Ryan, in the scene would you say that you realized like that's where things were going? Did you, was it like, did you know he was going to do that before you saw him fall to the ground, or like, what was your experience of watching that scene like, and like sort of moment to moment, and how that all played out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew he had a contingency plan of some sort, and that he was going to do something, that he would not just allow himself to be captured. I did not know exactly what that was going to be, but him stabbing himself was like not surprising, I would say. Like it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean they're two enemies, and he's standing there holding this weapon, and they're, I don't know, what, a foot away from one another, and it's one of those things where it's like, in another show or another scenario with different characters, even in this show, it would be, two enemies and one's holding a blaster, and Dedra's essentially threatening his life, right? I mean, she's telling him, I mean, she's not threatening to murder him, quote unquote, but she is threatening to destroy him. I think that would be fair to say. So to have the other character holding a weapon, it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen? You know what I mean? Like, who's going to fire Chekhov's gun in this situation? You know what I mean? Something's going to happen with that dagger, right? Like, so I think for me, I was just, obviously enthralled and super on edge. But when she left the room and he turned his back, I think, the writing was on the wall. And it's a difficult thing to see, because it's like, I love Luthen, as flawed as he is, but also it seems like 150% what that character would do in that moment, caught in that trap. Like, there's no way he's not going to do that, right? He's not. And she even tells him, I forget what he says, like, you're too late, which I loved, oh, you're too late. Because she's like, here, I found you. And he's like, I've known about you for 5 years, or whatever he tells her, right? Like, I've known everything about you all this time. And you're too late. And she tells him, well, you're about to tell us everything about the rebellion, or you're about to tell us everything about what you've done, so there's no way he would allow that to happen. Yeah, but the other great thing about this scene and the way this whole sequence and in this episode is put together is that she has screwed up big time, like such a major mistake to go there and confront him the way she did. Because she's frantic, saying, I need him alive, he can't die. She has the building surrounded, so she thinks, I can't lose in this situation. But he could have killed her, I feel like, number one. And number two, he very well, could die, and that's going to be obviously all on her shoulders. That the responsibility of that's going to be all on her. And I think it was brilliant the way it really sort of very naturally tied back into the way that character's been developed all along, even through season 1, that she would want the recognition for being the one to bring him in, even though he's not even, I don't know what the language is, but he's not even on her caseload anymore. She's not even supposed to be working on that, and Hirt, I forget how you pronounce the character's last name, but her protege from season 1 is really the one who should have been there, or should have been able to make the decision, or whatever it is, right? So, it's an act of hubris and an act of selfishness, I guess you'd say, or arrogance or whatever. But she has really screwed up in the way she's handled this, and obviously, by the end of the series, we see that she does pay the price for that. So, yeah, from there, obviously the Empire goes into, takes action full on. Partagaz alerts Hirt about her failed raid. Hirt alerts Partagaz about Lonnie being dead, and I think both actors do a fantastic job of demonstrating through their expressions that they both realize they are in very hot water, right? Like, this is a very, very, very dangerous situation for both of them. Yeah. The Imperials end up rooting around and collecting evidence in Luthen's shop, and as I was watching that scene, I felt like it almost felt like a wake or a tribute of some kind to Luthen, like a goodbye to Luthen in a way. It was bittersweet to see the Imperials in there, like, you know, rooting around in all these artifacts and the items that we so associated with him as an audience, you know. So,
yeah.
We didn't know where it was going to go yet. I think we probably pretty much knew, but we didn't know exactly where it was going to go yet in terms of Luthen's fate, but we knew enough. The shot or the scene that follows I thought was super compelling too. I'm wondering if you noticed this or if you agree with my interpretation. Back in the safe house, Clea is pulling a bag down from the ceiling because they've got, you know, I don't know, contingency bags or getaway bags or whatever, like hidden around. She's pulling one down. I swear, I watched the scene I think 3 times now. I swear it looks like she's pulling a noose down from the ceiling and she's going to hang herself. Did you see that at all when you were watching it, or did you?
No.
No. You think I'm?
No, the vibe I got was like she's, you know, frantic, putting a plan into action, and not, I don't know. She didn't have the energy of someone about to hang herself.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But in terms of the way the scene was, or just the object itself, and you know, her pulling that down, like, to me, it's, I'll have to go back and pull up the moment at some point. But I'm like, there's no way they accidentally. It's just her bringing a bag down from the ceiling. You know, I'm like, how would they have accidentally had the exact shape of a noose come down before the bag comes down and be held there for 5 seconds before we see the bag she's pulling down, if they didn't want to, you know, sort of. I feel like it was intentional, but I'll have to go back and look. You're right, though. She doesn't seem. I wouldn't think she seems suicidal either. But it was maybe meant to be a little bit of a fake out, or maybe I'm just doing that English teacher thing where I think I see, you know, symbolism or meaning where it's not there. I don't know. But from there, Ryan, the episode goes into the flashback thing, you know, where the episode title comes from, Make It Stop. I didn't totally understand what was happening until I read some stuff on like StarWars.com the next day. I mean, I knew to an extent, but Luthen in that moment is an Imperial soldier. And I don't know his age, and I don't know Clea's age, and I don't know how many years before Andor that all is. And I'm sure people can tell exactly from the uniforms and the color of the uniforms and everything else, like which month of galactic history that is or whatever. But I was just like, is he a rebel? Is he a Imperial? Is he a separatist? Like, I didn't feel like the episode made it super clear which side of any equation he was on in that scenario. What was your experience like watching that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I wasn't really like racking my brain to kind of like put all the pieces together there. To me, it was just like, okay, what is the purpose of this scene? Like, it's to, you know, establish how Luthen and Clea met and why she feels, you know, or the dynamics of their relationship and how that developed. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean it yeah, I didn't even really like think about like the sides or what war that was or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the big thing was that I was like seeing Luthen, a character who's so sort of in control of his emotions, and so, I mean, oftentimes he's fairly cold, you could say, you know what I mean? He just seemed, you know, to see him so emotional and see him so shook up that he was like hiding in that ship saying, make it stop. This is a character that we totally associate with ruthless violence and a willingness to, end a life at the snap of his hand if he feels it's necessary. And in this flashback sequence, he's hiding in a ship, nearly in tears, shaking, saying, make it stop, in reference to whatever violence is being carried on out there. So, I thought I really enjoyed the fact that I was seeing this completely different version of Luthen. It also, I think, reinforces why he would be so committed to the rebellion, not just because of Clea, although obviously, the more we learn as the episode goes on, that factors in too. But if he felt this much regret or this much shame or this much confusion about the violence he was being asked to carry out in the name of the emperor or empire, then, obviously all that tracks in terms of how he chooses to spend the rest of his life after that. So, as far as young Clea goes, I did get Newt from Aliens kind of vibes from her. I don't know about you. That's a good thing.
Hiding in the ship, like the
and dirt all over her face, and like the messy hair, the like frizzy, messy hair kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. But yeah, so the rest of this kind of sort of flashback sequence between these two characters, it kind of cuts back and forth between, Luthen in the hospital and Clea, going there to do what she has to do. It cross cuts between that and some of these scenes of this flashback, but we see what their life was like together. We see that has a ton of ingenuity and is very ruthless herself, or very sort of driven herself. Mm-hmm. But we also see that she is looking for family in Luthen, and that she's not going to find it there. There's the great moment where she asks, "Am I your daughter now?" And his response is to say, "When it's useful." And, I just thought, like, what a great piece of writing. That tells me so much about the dynamic between these two characters in 2 sentences, So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I don't know if she's looking for it, though.
Okay.
Like, because I read that scene as her being, like, kind of snotty. Like, like, as we're trying to scam these people, like, you called me your daughter, like, that's funny kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not that she, like, wants that. Because they already have, they have a relationship.
Yeah, but they do have a relationship, you're right. And you would think after spending weeks, months, however much time it is, with this father figure, knowing her family is dead, and that this is the father figure. She's like 12 years old or something, you know what I mean? She's being cared for by this person, and he tells that whoever the woman is they're bartering with or whatever, that this is his daughter. When they're walking away, she just asks him, "Am I your daughter now?" And when he says, "When it's useful," there's a look of disappointment on her face, and then there's a beat where nobody says anything, and then he basically like apologizes to her. And yeah, of course she doesn't say, "But Daddy, I wanted to be your daughter." She's not going to react that way, knowing like how hard she is as a character. But I think it was a moment of vulnerability. I think if he had said, "Yeah, I want to be your father," or whatever, like, I think that she would have wanted that. I don't know. That's how I read it, but I will say, as we continue to talk about this, that I watched the Andor Declassified video for these 3 episodes, which if anybody listening has not been watching those or didn't watch them, I would definitely recommend go back and watch those on YouTube or even on Disney Plus, where they look a little better than they do on YouTube. But they're about 10 to 15 minutes long, just sort of behind the scenes videos about these Andor arcs. So there's one for every 3 episodes, and they're super, super good. And there was a lot of conversation about Clea and her feelings towards Luthen, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah, and basically it was talking, the actors and the writers and the talking heads, sort of on the Declassified episode, were all in agreement that she loves him, but that she also can never fully forgive him because he was part of the Empire that killed her family. So even though obviously, yeah. maybe we talk about it more in a few minutes when we get to the part where, she makes the choice that she does at the end of the episode. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting and not something I really thought about while I was watching these episodes.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, and this is our last episode with Luthen, unfortunately, and one thing that I have come to associate with Luthen throughout the show is the incredible dialogue that character is able to deliver. She sees a young Clea sees Imperial prisoners, including children, executed by a firing squad of stormtroopers or death troopers, I forget. And afterwards, Luthen tells her, "All you know now is how much you hate." And he says, "You bank that, you hide that, you keep that alive until you know what to do with it." Yeah, really good. Really good, especially because that scene, or there is a scene that follows that, where they're in a cafe, in a pretty place, and he tells her he's about to blow up this bridge, with all these people on it or whatever. And he tells her, "Most people look away. You need to know now what you're giving up." And I just thought, oh my God, this is so good, because they're in this like comfortable, posh kind of cafe on this beautiful planet. And it's like, this is one possible life for you, Clea, but you're giving this up, right? If you choose to become what I am and follow me down the road that I'm going down, you're giving this up. And when she asks him if he's afraid, he says, "I'm only afraid of what I'm doing to you." And, man, yeah. So I don't know. Like, a lot of times I don't like these flashback type episodes either. Like in The Walking Dead, I've been watching that show, or not The Walking Dead. It might as well be The Walking Dead. What's it called? The Last of Us. I've been watching that show, and sometimes the flashback stuff, I'm just like, I don't know. But this one, I just felt like every scene was so good, and I just thought it told me so much about these two people. And, it did not feel like most of the time I have a problem with flashback episodes because they feel like they're just going back and sort of filling in things for the sake of filling them in, or it feels like it stops the forward momentum of whatever the plot is of the show at the time, or something like that. And this flashback to me just felt so rich and so relevant to what this episode is and what it's about, because the final moments of this episode, or the final kind of sequence or scene in this episode, is Clea sneaking into this hospital ruthlessly, stealing a nurse's uniform, getting past, either sneaking past or killing any stormtroopers that are guarding, her path to Luthen's room. She gets in there and she disconnects his life support, ends his life with tears streaming down her face, and kisses his forehead before she leaves the room. And I just thought, like, to watch this lengthy flashback, kind of teaching me as an audience, member, what these two people mean to each other, what the nature of their relationship is, to have that paired with her having to do this awful, awful thing, make this terrible, terrible decision. I just thought it was so powerful. Yeah, I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, like, by far the best Star Wars flashback we've gotten, which I would say is a pretty low bar, but I do think this, I mean, yeah, because of the intentionality of it and the way it's paired with the like present day stuff, I think it has like a huge impact, but it also brings like the general quality of the show to a flashback situation. So like you've got, every scene looks incredible, and you have this just like, as you were mentioning, just like consistently great dialogue the whole time, even if like the actual story isn't of how Luthen like found and sort of raised Clea isn't like terribly unique. I think I think it's elevated by just the production on the show and the dialogue, and then we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, but you know, as far as Star Wars de-aging of characters goes, this is probably like the least offensive version of it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not perfect, and it's one of those situations where, when you write yourself into this situation, there's not always a great way to capture that on screen, but I think they did a pretty good job with Luthen's look here. Compared
I think
to other examples.
I think the biggest sticking point with his look is the hair, which there's a long history of that in Star Wars too. Whether it be wigs like Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi with a wig that it's not like it's awful or anything, but you see it and go, well, that's a wig, you know what I mean? And that's how I felt about the hair here. Like I don't think I would even notice the de-aging stuff, but if it's even there, I'm sure it is. But I'm not likely to notice that too much, because I was like during Obi-Wan Kenobi, I kept saying, I don't know, did they even de-age Hayden, or is it just like you put him in the right situation? Because I just still think he looked young. You know what I mean? I still feel like he could probably pass for 30 years old, and I know he's supposed to be 20 years old or whatever, but it's right. Like, if you have a 30-year-old actor playing, like, movies are full of 25-year-olds playing 16-year-olds, and they didn't de-age them, right? You just the right costume, the right hair, whatever, and a lot of times people can pass for younger than they are, and Luthen didn't look that young either. You know what I mean? He looked younger than he did in the present timeline, but he didn't look that young. So I thought he looked good. I thought the hair was a little tough. You know what I mean? But as a bald man myself, and Luthen's not bald, but you put more hair on someone, and it's recognizable right away. So yeah. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to point out about this episode, make it stop, is the final shot. I thought was beautiful. It was an extremely slow fade out from Luthen's dead body, and I love that. It was noticeably slower than any fade out I've seen in probably any Star Wars thing. It was extremely slow, and so I just thought that was pretty poignant and beautifully done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was very good. But I think we kind of glanced over this, but the actual scene of Clea breaking into the hospital is so good. Like, it's so tense, and just the choreography of her maneuvering through the hospital and firing a gun, hiding a gun, the way she's moving, the cameras, everything. It's top tier espionage cinematography. And again, this is, the Tony Gilroy's bread and butter, a scene like this. And man, it's so cool. It's that kind of cinematic badass that's not just because a bunch of dudes are getting mowed down, or it's super ridiculous stunts and action and huge budget. It's just this is just shot so well that it's just visceral to watch.
Yep, it's the timing and the pacing and the music and yeah, exactly the way the scene builds, and it's fantastic. I would agree.
And just the emotional core of what she's doing adds to it as well. Yeah. So
yeah. And as we transition here into episode 11, who else knows? I would say too that Clea is just a tour de force in these final episodes in season 2. Tony Gilroy's talked a lot about it, others have talked about it, but the transformation of that character from season one, she was a great character in season one. People loved her. I loved her. You know what I mean? And she got a lot of praise. But I mean, the role that she plays in season two, the amount of screen time she has, what she's able to do, what she's given to do, it's such an, I don't know if upgrade is the right word, but it's so much more than it was in season one. And she's awesome. And the reason I say that at this moment is because we saw her sort of clinically, kind of make her way to that hospital room. I wouldn't say she was clinical in disconnecting him from life support there, but like just so focused, so competent, so clinical in infiltrating that hospital. But then in this episode, who else knows? She is breaking down. Cassian has to basically like beg her to leave. She doesn't, you know what I mean? She's just falling apart. Mm-hmm. And so she's both of those characters. She's able to play, or that character, she's able to play both of those sides of Clea so well. And it's just, very impressive.
Yeah.
But who else knows? I love the name of this episode. I love that as an idea because this information has now been leaked, right? The information that the Death Star is being constructed. We know how important that is to, the genesis of Star Wars, to just to Star Wars in general. I mean, so much storytelling revolves around this awful weapon and the fact that, that information got to the rebels and what they were able to do with that. So it's just, as an idea, it's so powerful. Like, oh my God, people are learning about this thing. They can't know about it. I just think that's a great title and such a great, sort of thread throughout the episode. But it opens with Dedra being interrogated by Krennic because, speaking of things I glossed over, she is arrested by the ISB in episode 10, which that's another thing I love about these final 3 episodes, the way the walls close in on the villains of this show and the way they they pay the price for, the roles they've played in the show. But Dedra's being interrogated by Krennic and her ambition, maybe that's a word I should have used when talking about episode 10, but her ambition is her undoing, I think you could say. And Krennic kind of lays that bare, right? Like, we know that you have been sneaking access to files about things that you don't have access to, and you have been digging around to learn more about this Death Star project. You're not supposed to know all this stuff, and of course her defense is, all I was ever doing was searching for Axis, which I don't think anybody believes. But again, she has this ambition, and she's not comfortable, or she's not willing to sort of be a mid-level player in the Imperial machine, right? She believes that she can find access better than anybody else can, that she can, accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished better than anybody else can, and she doesn't settle for whatever role they give her, which I think is kind of admirable, honestly. It's pretty impressive. So, but it has put her in this position where she is basically an enemy of the ISB, and it's through her own doing, I would say, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Krennic asks her, how does one balance such competency with the decision? And I forget what adjective he used there. I have a blank spot in the notes because I forget what he said, but there was a lot of contempt in whatever word it was. But how does one balance such competency with the decision to confront Luthen Rael alone? He shouts at her. Mm-hmm. So I think is this our last scene with Director Krennic in the show? I believe so. I want to say.
Yeah.
Now that it's over, what do you make of Ben Mendelsohn's return to Andor as Director Krennic?
Yeah, I think I think it's good that they kind of kept him at a distance for the most part, because I think when you have returning characters, they can kind of chew the scenery and kind of take the focus away. And I think, I think Krennic's story is pretty complete in Rogue One. I think, like, there wasn't really much more we needed to know about him, and I don't think this show tells us more about him, but I think it avoids the issue of, like, if they did this show and he wasn't there, it would be very weird if he wasn't there in some capacity. So I think they were very sparse and intentional about his roles here, and I think, like, every scene he's in is great, but it doesn't come at the expense of all, like, the new that they're building for this show. And I mean, I would say that, like, in some ways applies to even Cassian in a way for this show, and then especially a character we're going to be talking about shortly, with K2.
Yeah, I so agree. I mean, I think the show really, really passes the test of, we bring in legacy characters isn't the right word, but I guess just outside characters. We bring in outside characters and use them only in ways that make sense and only when it's necessary, rather than, losing focus on the story they're telling because, like, oh, well, everybody loves Krennic, so we better, put him in 3 big action sequences or make sure he's involved in all this dramatic, like, he's used in exactly the way that he probably should be used and makes sense. And, I think a less disciplined show would have had K2 show up a lot earlier, and there would have been all kinds of buddy cop antics between him and Andor, but, like, how would that have served the show? Like, I don't think it would have, you know what I mean? And so they are kind of using these characters in a way that it could be sort of anticlimactic to some people if it's like, oh my god, Ben Mendelsohn's coming back, I can't wait to see what he does. Well, what he does is just what he needs to do, or how the show can use him, rather than what's going to be super exciting for the audience necessarily, or it just doesn't distract from the story they're trying to tell, and they stay focused on that. I don't want to get into it now because we definitely don't have time, and maybe we both agree, I don't know, but we were just having a conversation the other day.
I was just thinking about this.
Yes, where there's a lot of people.
Trilogy. Yep.
Yeah, and it's not the same thing because the characters in the sequel trilogy are obviously much more important to Star Wars than Director Krennic or whatever. But I personally feel like the sequel trilogies had a similar philosophy, that they said, here's the story we're telling. It's about Rey, and it's about Kylo Ren, and it's about Finn and Poe, and whatever. And then what is the appropriate way? Like, what is the way to bring in sort of the big 3 and other, Lando and whoever, other characters from the original trilogy in a way that supports the story we're telling rather than takes over the story that we're telling, and there's not, like, only one right way to make the sequel trilogy. There's not only one right way to use Director Krennic and Andor or something. I'm sure there's other ways they could have done it that maybe could have been better or could have been at least as good or just different or whatever. But I just really respect, like, the restraint to say, look, we have these characters that we can involve in this story, but it is this story, so what is the way that makes sense to use these characters in this story without turning it into a different story and turning it into something else just because we know people want to see it, right? Because there was definitely a time, like, towards the end of this run of Andor where I was like, I didn't really get that much Krennic. You know what I mean? Krennic didn't have all that much to do. And it would have been so easy, I feel like, to be like, just write him into a bunch of stuff, important roles or big scenes or whatever, so that people wouldn't say that. But it would have been a lesser show. You know what I mean? Like, that was not the right move, I don't think. So anyway, we can drop it there. But I feel impressed by that.
Yeah, and then my one sentence about the use of legacy characters, original trilogy characters in the sequel trilogy, is that it's hit or miss across
Mm.
the three films. I think some of it
Okay.
is good. I think Han in The Force Awakens is pretty much perfect.
Mm-hmm.
His story there. Big fan of Luke in The Last Jedi. And then I think there's the rest of it's kind of hit or miss.
With some extenuating circumstances, also. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
There was intention to use Leia in a different way than they did, obviously, and they could only do what they could do with her.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's very unfortunate.
Yeah. And I also think it was for the best. I know we have differing opinions about the movie The Rise of Skywalker, but I also think it's for the best that they didn't stick Luke into 6 different scenes in The Rise of Skywalker either. Like, I think bringing him back for 2 minutes was fine and was very much in the sort of the style guide of Star Wars movies. Like, it made sense for him to show up, as a reassuring voice to his Jedi pupil. But that's all I needed from that character. And obviously a lot of people wanted way more Luke, but it would have been there just to please people, and it was not necessary. And I think it would undermine the incredible conclusion to his story in The Last Jedi. His story ends there and it's perfect. So let it be. But anyway, we should move on. All right. Okay. So from there, Krennic really threatens her and says, "We'll do our best without you," which I thought he's such a shithead and always has been. So I thought that was great writing for him. Clea reaches out through the sort of like Morse code radio that she has back in the safe house. Krennic and Partagaz give Hart the mission to find Clea. Like, this is super important. Or Hirt, I think his name is Hirt. The mission to find Clea. Then I said that was the last scene with Krennic. It wasn't, because there's this great moment with Krennic and Partagaz after the fact.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's so good because you have Dedra and you have Hirt, right? And these are in Cyril in previous, episodes, obviously, that are these younger, sort of hungry and ambitious Imperial, villains. But then you have these elder statesmen kind of Imperial villains in Partagaz and Krennic. And it's interesting because Krennic kind of felt like the young up-and-comer a little bit in Rogue One, and this is before Rogue One. But I think we come to understand him more as someone who is much more seasoned and has been around a long time and all that, like through his story in this show. But for them to be sitting there after the children are dealt with and sort of look at each other, and Krennic tells Partagaz, "I can't protect you, Leo." And Partagaz says back to him, like, "Best of luck to us both." It's these two sort of elder statesmen of the Empire looking at each other and saying, this regime, this monster that we, have both devoted our lives to, may turn around and eat us at any moment, and they both understand it. And in a way that the other, the younger characters, I don't think they quite do. Not to the same degree anyway. So, those kind of quiet moments in this show are sometimes some of the best stuff.
Yeah. Yep. That was an incredible conversation.
Yeah. I don't remember, Ryan, if you're one of the many people who sort of begrudgingly respect Dedra and kind of really, like her as a character, evil as she is. But, I felt like it was sort of a little bit of a justice for Dedra type moment when Hirt visits her in her cell and basically is like, "I can't figure out how to figure out where Clea is." And Dedra's like, "All right, well, look at some old pulse codes from some old evidence or whatever, and that's the key they need to figure out where Clea is." So ironic, for her to be in that cell, a prisoner of the Empire. And yet she, again, proves that she is so resourceful and skillful and, competent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like, by this scene, I didn't I didn't know. Well, like obviously, did not know her ultimate fate,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think a scene like this, I was still like, well, how is she going to get out of this? Like, she's like, are they going to release her so she can like help and like you think that because I guess she's the primary antagonist of this show.
Yeah.
Maybe. And so it's like, well, when does she get her like final showdown
Mm-hmm.
with Andor and everyone? Like, what's and so these scenes are. It was like really interesting where like the scene ended and she was still in the cell. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, well then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so we haven't talked about anything that's been happening on Yavin yet in this episode, and there are some great scenes on Yavin. We get to see K2 full on being K2, and you know this is a year after Bix has left, right? And so when we catch back up with Cassian, it's like him and Melchi and K2 sitting around playing cards together, doing it seems like a lot of drinking. Whenever Cassian's in his like little hut or whatever, there's always a bottle of something being passed around. I noticed, so it seems like they're doing a lot of drinking there. And when I was watching that Andor Declassified, I think it was Tony Gilroy who was like, "Yeah, it's basically turned into like a frat house, you know, like Andor and Melchi and K2 are living together in this house that was like." We commented on it when we first saw their living space in Yavin, like it's like really nice, you know. And it's not like it's not nice anymore, but it has lost the touch that it had. And instead it's these dudes sitting around playing cards and drinking and like, whatever, right? So ordering pizza and just being kind of dudes.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very divorced dad
Yep.
energy here.
Yeah. But I thought the banter between all of them was really great. And, as much as K2 played a pretty limited role in the series overall, like the scenes he's in these two episodes are great. And he's so funny. I loved it.
Yeah, I think if this was like, if the scene that is coming wasn't there, I think this would have felt like kind of a, pandering, kind of forgettable scene. It's very Star Trek: The Next Generation when they have everyone on the crew playing cards and like Data is there and like super like robotically analyzing the card game and stuff. Like it was that vibe essentially. And I think like if we didn't also get an incredible K2 scene a little bit later, I would have been like, really, you brought him back for this? And like you ended that last set of episodes super awkwardly with that K2 Cassian scene that like completely undermined the emotional impact of what happened before. And so I was still like, I was watching this and I was like, okay, like this, I was kind of whatever about this scene initially, but then it pays off eventually.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And so K2, Cassian, and Melchi, they take off like as soon as they hear what's going on with Claire, or they get the message, I guess, from Clea, and they realize like something's got to be wrong. They bolt out of there, and Draven ends up like punishing Willman after that, and confines him to his quarters and says that Luthen called and you two went running. And this is one of a couple lines like this in this episode and the next one that hit different after Luthen's fate, right after we know he's gone. Willman says, "You can run him down all you want, but the truth is none of this would be here if it weren't for him." And I love that line. There's an even better one in episode 12, but Yeah, that's the Yavin stuff. And then, sort of the conclusion of this episode, episode 11, Who Else Knows, is the beginning of the great stuff with K2, because he and Cassian and Melchi arrive, and it's really tense because at the same time that they're getting there, we see that the Empire is closing in as well. Hirt and his sort of team are, assembling and making their way to the safe house too. So it's one of those things like who's going to get there first, right, between the Empire and Cassian. And they get in there, and of course, when they do, Clea is hesitant to leave. Like, she doesn't really want to leave, and she doesn't trust where they're going to go. And, she says everybody on Yavin hates them, like hates Clea and Luthen, and they finally convince her to go. But K2 back in the ship realizes, like, wait a minute, they're blocking. They are blocking, or they stopped blocking, or something with the comms. He realizes, okay, this is bad, right? So he gets out. A great moment. Forget what is the question the soldier or the officer asks K2 as he's walking across that bridge.
Like, is this one of ours, or did you request? Yeah,
something like that. And he's just like, no, and like smacks him, and he goes flying off the side of the bridge. Like, I loved it. You look less in love with that moment, Ryan.
Yeah, I think it was like I feel like this was like kind of like the last like goofy moment, and I think in the I don't know, I feel like some of the like the really goofy K2 stuff feels a little different in the context of this show. And I feel like, the card game and this scene are like, okay, we're going, I don't know. Like, they didn't like necessarily bother me, but it was like, we're going to have a little bit of fun, a little laugh here, because like shit's about to get pretty dark. And, yeah, which, I mean, I guess is kind of the vibe of Rogue One in a way. But yeah, I feel like if you were still at this point expecting a bunch of goofy K2 physical comedy and jokes, I feel like the mood very much changes once he's like into the building.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it does feel like these final two episodes really make a concerted effort to try to link up to Rogue One and feel connected to Rogue One, whether it's through costumes and locations, or scenes like this with K2, or again on the Declassified episode, the composer of the score was talking about how they started eliminating electronic music and emphasizing orchestral music as they got towards the end of the season, because they wanted the music and the score of the show to kind of lead right into Rogue One. So I think there were a lot of conscious efforts like that to try to make these final episodes feel a little more tonally maybe connected to Rogue One. So that tracks with their intentions, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously, kind of the ending of this episode spills into the beginning of episode 12, which is called Jedha, Kyber, Urso. And it is all, the Imperials trying to make their way to Clea before the Empire, or before the Rebels make their way to Clea. Obviously, Cassian and Melchi have gotten to Clea, but it's a question of getting her out, before the Imperials get there. And if it weren't for K2, it would not have happened, right? Because they were surrounded, and K2 ends up busting in, and in a really brutal but super cool choice, he ends up, using Hirt, Lieutenant Hirt or Officer Hirt or whatever he is, using him as a human shield, which is so savage because we've seen K2 droids like take a ton of blaster fire and they're fine.
Literally did not even need to do that. Yeah.
So I thought that was really great. I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
And not to revel in the torture of another human being, but I just thought it was
Well,
pretty
I mean,
badass.
he was dead pretty quickly, so I guess
That's
it's
true.
not really torture, but yeah,
That's true.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. And while this is happening too, there's cuts to shots of, or at least one shot or scene of Partagas, and he's listening to updates about, you know, the success or lack of success of this unit that's trying to recover Clea, and he looks visibly scared, like he is freaking out, which again, another, I thought, really great touch. So obviously they are successful. They get Clea out of there and they travel back to Yavin. And I think most or all of the rest of the episode really takes place there, you know, minus some cuts to Coruscant or other places just to kind of show us the fates of some of the Imperial characters. The rest of the show kind of plays out on Yavin. And, you know, one thing I would say about this episode, this final episode of Andor, just kind of overall thoughts on it, is that it really does feel like the denouement episode, and a lot of TV shows have these, you know, stuff like Game of Thrones or whatever. A lot of times, like the big finale episode would sort of be the second to last episode, and then the last episode is kind of, you know, bringing things down and wrapping things up and all that sort of thing. Yeah, epilogue. Yeah. And I think that's how this episode feels, and I love that choice, and I'm glad that that's, you know, the way they chose to kind of play it out. Yeah. So it's a sort of a bittersweet episode. It has a killer opening action sequence, but from there, it's a lot more sort of, I don't know, bittersweet. I feel like is the feeling watching this incredible show wrap up. It's like I want more. I don't want it to end, and yet, you know, I do want to learn sort of the conclusion to the story of all these characters. So, on Yavin, Mon Mothma is arguing with Saw Gerrera. Saw doesn't trust them. Again, I think this is stuff that like really is necessary to sort of create the scenario between these factions in Rogue One. Saw believes that the rebels, or the Yavin rebels, or whatever you want to call them, are basically like spying on him, and you know, he doesn't trust them. So he tells Mon Mothma, if only you could fight as well as you lie, you know. And a great thing about this show, just in general, is that coming out of that scene, I'm like, I don't exactly know what to believe there, you know, like he may be right to a certain extent, because they don't trust him either. And so there's all this sort of, I don't know, subterfuge between not only the villains in the show, but sometimes between the heroes as well.
Yeah, and which is, you know, what we've all always known about Saw. Like he's always, you know, he's always kind of on the fringe of the rebellion. Yeah. Speaking of being on the fringe of the rebellion, when Cassian gets back, he is brought before rebel leadership, and what I thought was a great scene. And again, this felt very connected to Rogue One because of the players sort of at the table there. But Cassian's brought before the rebel leadership and does tell them that the Emperor's energy product is a cover story for a secret weapon, that Gorman, Jedha, and Galen Erso are all connected to this weapon, and it, you know, as an audience, it's frustrating in, I think, a good way, but it's frustrating to us as audience members because it's like he is bringing you the essential, the key piece of information for Star Wars. Like, this is the thing. Like, you must stop the Death Star. Everything depends on this. The whole first movie is all about this, and it's like, again, so integral to everything. Like, everything in Star Wars branches out from the rebels destroying that Death Star. And yet they're all that's the Jesus Christ moment. Exactly. And Jesus Christ, they're all sitting around this table acting like, I don't know, dude, like, I don't know if we want that info. Like, is it real? Who knows? Whatever. It's crazy, right? Bale tells him the problem here is Luthen. And essentially they're saying, well, we don't know if we can trust the source. And they do raise good points too, which is that like perhaps the Empire was playing Luthen, you know, perhaps
They're trying to ensnare us in a trap. They want us to, follow up on this and bring everything we have, put everything we have into this, and then they'll just snuff us out. That's pretty solid reasoning, But yeah, Bell tells him the problem here is Luthen, and Cassian says, when I say I know Luthen, I know the good and the bad. None of that can take away what he did and how hard it was. And I love this line. This gave me goosebumps and made me emotional. It's insulting to hear him run down by people who have given a fraction of his sacrifice to this rebellion. Beautiful stuff. Mm-hmm. Beautiful stuff. Mm-hmm. I also love the subtle ways that the show communicates to us where each of these individual rebel leaders is on this situation, because Cassian is confined to his quarters. He's punished, basically. He's told, thanks for bringing us the information, but we don't know how we feel about it, and you are confined to your quarters. And he asks, do I have permission to visit Clea in the infirmary? And before he's even done asking the question, Mon Mothma's like, yes, permission granted. And it's one of those things where she is asserting, she's sticking up for him, right? This is the guy that extracted her from the Senate. And also, of course, she has that connection to Luthen too, right? She didn't always trust him. She told him, right now in this moment, I'm more frightened of you than anything. And yet she knows how much he sacrificed too. So I just, I love it. I love it. I love it. I keep saying that in this episode. I feel like I don't always say that when I'm talking about Star Wars stuff, but I love it. But I do. There's so much that I just love and just think is so well done. But yeah, so from there, he visits Clea in the infirmary, and then he also has to break the news to Will that Luthen is dead. He tells Will that Luthen made it worth it, and that was, very impactful too. This is the same thing he told Mon Mothma. She's like, how do I thank you, when he extracted her from the Senate, and he said, make it all worth it. So great stuff there. More Rogue One connections being planted as the rebellion. Draven tells, I think it's Draven who tells Cassian that they keep getting messages from Kafrene, from Tivik, which is Timu, Pablo Hidalgo from the beginning of Rogue One. So they're kind of setting up that plot line here as well. What else? Mothma and Val. There's some great moments between Mothma and Val. A great moment between Val and Cassian, where Val and Cassian, they're toasting to one another and bringing up all the different sacrifices, made by various characters and in various locations, Aldani and Ferrix and Narkina 5 and all that. So I thought that was were you okay with that?
Yeah, I think this was for me, this was the turning point where, everything just started hitting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like this scene is we're wrapping up now. We're wrapping up this show. We're going to kind of, reflect on everything that's happened, and just hearing the names of the people, the places, I don't know, because I feel like from here it's it's kind of that that moment in Revenge of the Sith where it's all right, we're going into emotional territory now. And and I think that's kind of where what this scene is, because I think everything that follows here just keeps amplifying the emotion, and it's all just so well done from here on out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right after that, basically, Val has been asked by Mon Mothma pretty much to spy on Cassian to see if the story is true or not, or to sort of try to figure out, but to be sneaky and try to figure out if the story is true or not. And rather than trying to do that, Val just looks at Cassian and says, Mon wants to know if your Luthen story is true. That is not what Mon Mothma asked Val to do. She didn't say, hey, go in there and just tell him, like, I want to know, right? Like, and I love that because I think it's like just communicating this level of trust that she has in Cassian. They've been through some shit together. You know what I mean? So I love that. And Cassian's response, I love too. He died for it. Without him, none of us are here. And Clea wouldn't lie about it. And Ryan, you mentioned that you feel like around this point is when this show starts to sort of say like, hey, we're getting into the emotional stuff and hey, we're wrapping things up. So I'm wondering, how did you feel about pairing Clea wandering out of the infirmary, lost in the rain, searching for something with Nemec's voice and his manifesto playing over that?
Too much. Too much. That's how I died. That's why it took us a month to get here. It's too much. It's too good. It's too intense.
Remember this. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. The imperial need for control is so unnatural. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Cut to Partagaz, who's listening to that same, he's listening to the manifesto from Nemec, and he says it just keeps spreading, doesn't it? I thought that was so beautiful that there's this little moment that reveals that Nemec's manifesto has gone viral, that it's spreading all over galactic social media or whatever, and that, you know, the people want that message. The people are searching out and seeking out and spreading that message, and that somebody like Nemec, who is all but forgotten, is not forgotten, and, you know, his beliefs are the beliefs of this rebellion, and that people are hungry for that. So good. So good.
So good. Yeah.
And there's so many awful, corny, cheesy ways that they could have tried to weave his manifesto back into this final episode, and instead they did it in a way that's like absolutely perfect.
Yep.
Also, so heavy, so poignant, so perfect. Partagaz being basically arrested, knowing he's being arrested, and asks for a moment. May I have a moment to collect my thoughts? And, cut to the supervisor standing outside the room. There's a couple stormtroopers or officers there that are going to, assist in bringing him down to... who are they bringing him to? The Emperor, I think. Did they say? The Emperor? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you hear Partagaz, you see him sit down at the table. You see him take a blaster out and put it on the table. Cut to that supervisor standing out there and the sound, right? And the troopers want to go in, and he holds his hand up and says, "Yep, give it a minute." Because he knew as soon as he left the room, he knew, I need a moment to collect my thoughts. He knew what was going to happen. And it's so dark, but it's so tragic, but it's so good too. It's like these two people both understand, sort of like Partagaz and Krennic earlier, or in the previous episode or whatever. They both know the score. You know what I mean? They know what's happening here. And rather than not allowing him that choice and bringing him to the Emperor, it's like two soldiers, two evil brothers in arms, respecting one another, understanding one another.
Yeah.
Even more tragic and difficult, especially on reflection, is Val's conversation with Cassian. And Cassian telling Val basically, well, I might, hopefully I can be with Bix again eventually, but, I've got something to do right now or whatever. And Val says, don't wait too long, Unbelievable. When you think about Val and, oh my God, what's her name? Val's girlfriend. I cannot believe I'm forgetting her name at the moment.
Oh man.
But considering what happened with their relationship and what happened to her, Cinta, of course. Yes, of course, Cinta. So Val and Cinta, considering their relationship, and then considering like what we now know about what Bix is up to, which we'll hold off and talk about in a second, it's just so powerful. Yeah, Draven, telling Cassian about Tivik on Kafrene, like that's a powerful moment because Draven's been up Cassian's ass like for about 6 episodes now and not trusting him and yelling at him all the time and telling him you can't go anywhere and everything. And he basically goes to Cassian and is like, go to Kafrene, you know. I love that. I love that like vote of confidence in Cassian, especially considering they've just like reprimanded him and punished him, and he was brought before that rebel leadership with the most important news ever. I keep saying that or whatever, but there's no way to overemphasize like how critical that Death Star news is and how insane it is that they no sell it. Like they act like whatever, dude, who cares? And basically put him on trial for, you know, playing the most crucial role in saving everything. They put him on trial for that. So for then Draven to like give him that vote of confidence, I just thought was fantastic as well. And then the fact that Mothma and Draven together go to Bail and say, you know, let Cassian do this. For Bail then to go to Cassian and say, I'm going to send you and tell him, may the Force be with you, Captain. Again, Ryan, I got the goosebumps there. I got the goosebumps. This show has been almost entirely Force-free. And I love, you know, it does kind of start to connect it to Rogue One because you've got, I'm one with the Force is with me, and the Force is definitely, you know, we've got Jyn's Kyber crystal that she wears around her neck and all that. Like the Force is part of this story. It wasn't really part of the Andor story, but it is part of the larger story that Andor is connecting up to. And yeah, I mean, I loved watching 2 seasons of this show and having it be so grounded and so different from so many other things in Star Wars. But I also love in these final moments having that, like, you know, having the Force withheld as much as it was, and a phrase like that that's so integral to like Star Wars, to hear it come back again, like it made me feel something for sure.
Yeah, I have no real issues with it.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah.
And then the final few moments of the show are, I think, wordless. Gorgeous music, and it's a montage of all the characters from throughout the show. So I guess the sort of last thing to talk about here, besides overall thoughts, is just the sort of outcomes for each of these characters. The first one that I have listed, so I think it's the first one we see, but the first one I have listed is Perrin, and it's a quick moment. What is your interpretation of this moment of Perrin in the speeder, Ryan? What do you think that scene is telling us about Perrin and his fate?
Man, yeah, divorced dad vibes, but also him just being him in a way. It's like, it's essentially him in a taxi with another woman, and he's just drinking from the bottle.
It's a morning after type thing, like you know, I don't know if you want to use the phrase, but you know, people say like the walk of shame or whatever when you're walking home the next morning from wherever you ended up the night before, that sort of thing. But did you catch the fact that the woman that he's with is what's his name? Skolden? Is that his name? The gangster guy that borrows or that hides, that launders Mon's money. It's his wife. So Mon Mothma's husband is in a speeder drinking the next morning with his daughter's mother-in-law's head on his shoulder, which
okay.
Yeah. So, like, is he having an affair with his daughter's mother-in-law? Or did their, you know, I don't know what the actual, and it obviously, like, we don't need to know, but it's dark, right? It is pathetic. I don't know, pathetic, just empty, hollow, you know what I mean? And Perrin gives this, like, passionate speech earlier in the show about joy and, you know, Tony Gilroy described it as hedonism. Like, that's this whole thing is hedonism, and it's pretty empty in the end, right? He's not happy. Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of got what he wanted, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
It's really depressing.
Yeah, and I could watch a whole show about, like, what happened with Mon and Perrin, like, what was Perrin's life like in the days that followed? Maybe I could read a book about that, you know, like what was Perrin's life like in the days that followed Mon leaving the Senate? I would half expect him to be executed, to be honest with you. If not that, then I would half expect him to be like working closely with the Empire, like in some way, you know what I mean? Like, is he a turncoat? Like, yeah. And I don't know, you know, I don't want to go into it too much right now, and I don't have all the details in front of me, but apparently there was a scene written initially in the script, in one of these scripts, where there was going to be a conversation between Perrin and Mon Mothma, where Perrin basically said, like, I knew all along what you were doing, and you could have trusted me. Like, you could have, I think he said something like, they interrogated me weekly, and I never, like, spilled the beans, right? And I knew what you were doing, and, like, all that kind of stuff. So it was a bit of a face turn moment for Perrin, I guess. I like it much better like this. I like it ambiguous, and, you know, I think it's for the best that they didn't film that. But yeah, I just find the character fascinating, and I know most people really, really hate him, and there's a lot to criticize, but I find him really fascinating, and I think he's such an interesting character.
Yeah, and I mean, you're supposed to hate him.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah, and
but I feel like some people talk about him like he's one-dimensional or something, and I think actually he's really intriguing. You know what I mean? You're supposed to hate him, but, like, you're supposed to hate Dedra too, and I do. But also I find her totally fascinating, you know? So I don't know. I feel like some people maybe react to a character that's hateable by sort of saying, okay, well, just won't think about all the things that make them tick, or, you know, kind of view them as a human being, or consider, you know what I mean? And I just think that's not how these characters are written at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Speaking of Dedra, we see that she is in a prison on Narkina 5. Oh my God. So good. So it was surprising, and yet it made total sense. It might not be Narkina 5 either, I guess, but it's the same situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of that thing, like, where I was mentioning earlier, like, you're waiting for her to get out, to have her final showdown, to be the villain of this show, but, like, she's done after episode 10. And, you know, the system that she was trying to, you know, she devoted her entire life to, like, pleasing them, to accomplishing things, to, you know, being the best, the sacrifices she made, everything, it just ends in this prison.
Yeah. I screamed on program at my TV. Like, I saw that and I was like, on program! I thought it was so, just such a fitting end to that character. And yeah, they could have killed her or whatever, and this is so much more, I don't know, so much sadder, you know what I mean? So much more awful of a conclusion for her, I think. So,
and, you know, it's fitting with every character who's involved in the whole Death Star thing, because you also have, you know, you have Krennic in Rogue One, you know, betrayed by the Empire, and, you know, killed by the Death Star, by Tarkin.
Yeah.
And then you have Tarkin in A New Hope, you know, retreat in our moment of triumph, and then, you know, he dies on the Death Star when it's destroyed. Like, it's so... Even the
Emperor, your faith in your friends will be your undoing, or whatever, right? Like, he's totally arrogant and killed by his own, I don't know, arrogance and refusal. Yeah.
Well, and literally by his creation, until he comes back in the sequel trilogy. But, like, you know.
Until he comes back in the EU. and then in the sequel trilogy.
Oh,
But yes,
yes. Yes. Yeah.
Until
But I
George
think, like,
Lucas planted the idea about him coming back in the sequel trilogy and the prequel trilogy when he established that he was obsessed with finding a way to solve, how to cheat death. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I think like the people directly involved in this, Death Star thing, they all like have these very, ironic, tragic fates, and I think that's like so compelling.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's supported too. Like two other shots that we get in this montage is Saw looking out the window on Jeddah, where obviously he will meet his fate at the hands of the Death Star there, and then Krennic looking out at a completed Death Star too, as well. So, so yeah, we have those two scenes. We have Cassian walking toward the ship to leave, and this is like we cut, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, between these shots of these other characters and Cassian sort of walking, very heroically or whatever. And it's like, it all has been, and, you brought up the point earlier, which I think was a good one, that in some ways this show was, chose not to always be as focused on Cassian as, one might have expected with a show, being called this. But I think in these final moments, it does all come back to being about him and about what he's going to contribute. And I think one of the, kind of primary arguments of this show is how, an endless number of people that we don't think of, we don't credit, we don't, recognize, contribute to an effort like this. And Cassian is one of them, but then there's so many that had to contribute to Cassian for him to be, because like watching Rogue One in 2016 is like, I never heard of Cassian Andor, but oh my God, like this could have never happened without him, and then you watch Andor and you're like, well, I never heard of Val and Cinta and, all these other characters, Marva and whoever else, but it's like Cassian couldn't happen without them. And if he didn't happen, then, so it's pretty powerful stuff in that regard.
Yeah.
But Ryan, we have basically one more shot to talk about, and it is, it was so masterful, in some ways, I guess, like after seeing it, it's like, oh, of course, but I never thought of it. I never expected it. I'm sure other people theorized this could happen. I never once considered it. We cut to the wheat planet. I forget the name of it now. More something more. I don't know. Anyway, we cut to that wheat planet, and B2 is there playing with another droid. So that was sweet because this is the show. We watched the show for 2 seasons thinking everyone has to die. And, oh, God, it's going to be so painful when B2 finally dies, right? And he doesn't. He's playing with another droid on that planet, and that's great. And but then we see Bix, and we see Bix standing with her back to the camera in this field, this wheat field, and she's looking out on the horizon, looking up to the sky maybe. The music is beautiful. It's understated. It's mournful. It's sad. But there's a little bit of hope there too. And then we have the reveal that she is standing there holding Cassian's baby. And, it is the most, kind of beautiful, powerful, perfect, hopeful ending to a show that was often, I think, very low on hope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was blown away. I mean, I remember watching this for the first time. Like I said, I was shouting on program at the TV when I saw Dedra on Narkina 5, and I don't remember what I said, but I just started like talking to myself when I was watching this final moment. Like I can't believe they're doing this, or I can't believe like, I don't know what I said, but it was just like disbelief and just like me expressing how to myself just how like perfect this conclusion is, how they got me. I think that was basically it. You got me. You got me. I didn't see it coming. You got me. You got me in the sense that you surprised me. You got me in the sense that I have tears in my eyes. You got me in the sense that it's like just a perfect conclusion that I didn't know I needed. And now I cannot imagine this show ending any other way. It's so, so great.
Yeah. 'Cause I mean, that's, I want to go back to your first point of like, we expected everyone to die Like, we expected Val to die. We expected Bix to die. Like, yeah. And that's not what happened.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, and then I was definitely not expecting there to be a child in Andor. To in the show with, and now I'm kind of two minds about this, of like, the, you know, where do we go from here. And I think the you know I think the bigger part of me is, we don't go anywhere from here. We, we end the story knowing that Cassian's legacy will be carried on despite his, fate, his obviously what he contributes to the rebellion, to the galaxy, we know from Rogue One. But his interpersonal legacy, his family legacy, will be carried on through Bix and his child. And I think we just let that be. Same with, Bix's story, Clea's story, Vale's story. I don't think we need to, see their stories kind of, played out and finished. This was the conclusion. And my worry is that it's not going to be allowed to be the conclusion, and we're going to get, the story of Cassian's child as an adult, and whatever that may be. And I feel like, in less capable hands, that's not something we want.
Yeah. I mean, I think this story is as powerful as it is because Cassian is not, related, somebody's cousin or whatever, right? And there is no connection. And again, it brings in characters from the Star Wars saga when necessary, but it never does it just to do it, I don't think, So yeah, I'm totally with you. In terms of Val or whoever, seeing what happens to them after, I don't want it in a TV show or a movie or anything like that. I wouldn't be offended, I don't think, if somebody writes a novel 3 years from now about Val and other characters post Andor and, whatever, that stuff doesn't, or even comics. I mean, it doesn't seem like something they would do in comics, but that's fine. You know what I mean? And to me, I think that would be fine. But in terms of revisiting these characters on screen, I don't think that is necessary. I don't think that would serve this show or these characters particularly well. I don't really want to see that either. I definitely don't want to see it with Cassian's child, because like you said, I think as soon as you do that, it's oh, well, then we see this hero's quest that Cassian's kid goes on or whatever. It to me, it undermines the sacrifice, and that to me is the point of this. You know what I mean? Look what Bix is giving up for the rebellion here. Her child, her partner and her child's father gone, right? That's what she's giving up. Look what Cassian's giving up. He had a whole life that he could have had, and he wanted it. He wanted it. I mean, he told her, I'm leaving. I'm done with the rebellion. He wanted it so bad. He didn't get it, right? Look what this kid is giving up. He will never know his father because of the sacrifice his father made. So as soon as that kid just becomes another, cool character in a cool Star Wars thing, it's that, to me, that takes away from the meaning of this final scene. So yeah, I hope they don't do that either. I take some solace in the fact that if they do, I feel like it's going to be like 10 years from now, and at that point it'll be like, I don't think it'll really affect how I would watch Andor or interpret Andor or anything like that. Now if 6 months from now they're like, oh, the new Disney Plus show is Cassian Jr. and whatever, then that would probably hurt my appreciation of this show. But I hope they don't ever do it. If they do, I feel like it'll be so long from now. In an on-screen medium, I could see stuff like that in comics or books or something, and I'd be less, I could think I'd be less concerned with that just because it's such a separate kind of medium or whatever. But
yeah, I'd rather they just didn't.
Yeah,
just don't like. But
yeah, and I do think it's supposed to be a kind of hopeful conclusion, and it is a hopeful conclusion, but it needs to be like a bittersweet hopeful conclusion. Like, life goes on.
Yeah. It's extremely, I mean, for the reasons, it's all sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
This is, like you said, this is what Cassian could have had. This is what Bix and his child could have had. Like, with a father, like, yeah.
But it's also completely antithetical to what the Empire was trying to accomplish. You know what I mean? Like, yes, Cassian dies and sacrifices himself, but look at the way they tried to oppress and destroy, real people, and like, life goes on. You know what I mean? So life goes on, and there's a sacrifice that comes along with that. But like, the life that Bix and her child are going to hopefully have on that wheat planet, and after the destruction of the Empire a couple of years from now, that's what they've been fighting for all along. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's both of those things, right? It's painful, but it's also the realization of everything he was fighting for, and that they were all fighting for all this time, that Marva was fighting for, all of them, Brasso, mm-hmm. and everybody. They were fighting for people to have the opportunity to live the life that Bix and this child are going to live. But it's tragic and painful because Cassian's not going to be able to live it with them. You know what I mean? So it's both so painful and so hopeful. And I think that's a perfect conclusion. But, I'm on 100% agreement with you. Let's leave it at that. It can be that, and that is a perfect thing for it to be. And as soon as you start trying to add to it or explore it further, I think you're only going to reduce the impact of the moment as it stands.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
All right, Ryan. The dinner bell is ringing for me over here at my house. So I am about ready to wrap up the episode, if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
I see a cat is on your lap, probably asking for you to ring the dinner bell too. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. So. In summary, Andor is the most incredible Star Wars television show ever. I love it so much, and it is bittersweet that we are recording our final episode, at least for now, that's completely devoted to Andor, but this show is going to stick with me for a long time, and it is basically unbelievable that we got this show. I cannot actually believe that we got it and that it's as perfect as it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think the new standard for Star Wars going forward. Not saying everything needs to be Andor, or we can't have other things, or that I won't enjoy things that are not Andor and not on this level, but I hope this is something that inspires future Star Wars creators, not saying they need to try to, create this exact thing again, but I think this shows that, we can have Star Wars for adults that is, like, a little more dense and intellectual, and you don't need to rely so heavily on fan service and even action to make compelling Star Wars that, hits for people. I don't know a single person who watched this show and did not enjoy it. Whereas I feel like every other Star Wars thing is kind of this, it's either like a culture war or a fandom war, or or people just being generally dismissive of it, or being ridiculously defensive of things. I think this is just a show that, hey, just make a good Star Wars show, and people will, the people who want to come to it will come to it. You will have your audience, and people will really appreciate it.
Yeah. I mostly agree. I mean, I don't want too many other sort of shows or movies or whatever to try to be this, because I don't think they would be able to anyways. But there are definitely some lessons to take away from it. Tony Gilroy keeps talking about how this will never happen again. And I think he's probably right, like in terms of the budget they put into it and stuff like that. But, I suppose that's a little, I don't know. That's a little arrogant almost too, like, oh my God, the thing I made, nobody else is going to ever do that again. But I think he's coming more from the perspective of like, I can't believe they let us do this, and probably no one else is going to be allowed to do this again.
I don't think it's coming from a place of arrogance, but I think
think he's a little arrogant, but I think he's earned it, because he's like off the charts. Like, I don't know, he's so good.
Yeah, if anyone can be about a Star Wars project, I would. He can, but again, thanks to Kathy Kennedy for believing in this project and giving the creative control that, honestly, like, I think he's right in some ways. I honestly can't picture another Star Wars project with, like, all the things that just shocked us about this show. But I think, why not? What's holding it back?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I got to go. But I would say, too, like, one thing that Kathleen Kennedy has consistently been saying is that she wants people to come to Star Wars and tell personal stories that are the stories that they want to tell that are right for them. And I think this is the Star Wars show that Tony Gilroy would make and did make. And I don't think there's that many other Tony Gilroys out there. You know what I mean? So I don't want someone else to come try to copy what Tony Gilroy did and make his kind of Star Wars. Like, make your own kind of Star Wars. But this certainly shows that the scope of what Star Wars can be, it's expanded now, right? It's not, like, this is not something we would have anticipated necessarily could exist within Star Wars, and now it does. And so hopefully, people will kind of continue to kind of push the boundaries of Star Wars. But, in a way, I feel like they really push the boundaries of Star Wars with this show, but in a way that never, to me, it never betrayed what Star Wars is or should be about or anything like that, So it was like, it's so perfect. But I got to go, Ryan. I got to go. All right. So we will be back sometime soon. Now that we're alive again, we'll be back sometime soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast. I would love to talk about Light and Magic Season 2. I would love to talk about Tales of whatever the Tales of are of now. I forget what that was. But the show that came out on not Tales of the Jedi, not Tales of the Sith, Tales of the Underworld, I believe it's called. I want to talk about that. And, who else knows what will be happening this summer with Star Wars? Plus, there's a lot of old Star Wars we can go back and talk about. So we will be back with some new episodes of the Blockade Runner podcast soon. Until then, you can find all of our previous episodes at blockaderunnerpodcast.com. You can email the show, blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. Follow the show on Blue Sky or join our Discord, which is linked to in the show notes. Ryan, if listeners want to follow you, how could they do that?
I'm on Blue Sky at Fami Computing.
All right. Cool. So thanks once more for listening, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast.